the situation we're dealing with is actually one of a structure of power, where there's certain editors who are the gatekeepers and decide what ideas are normal, what stories are acceptable, even what is marketable means that you can imagine a certain type of people to whom you will market a book or an idea or a story. So we think it's really important to present awards to editors to recognize the work they're doing. And it's my honor that we're going to present an award today to Chris Jackson, who's a vice president editor at One World imprint, formerly at Spiegel and Grau. It's an understatement to say that Chris has been nurturing an entire generation of some of the most important writers in American letters, including Edwidge Danticat, Victor LaValle, who you'll hear from in a moment, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Jay-Z, Matt Taibbi, Molly Krabappel, and many others, Aaron Magruder. The point is not just that Chris is a one-man institution, but rather that he's creating a whole nother institution, an alternative literary ecosystem for incredible writers of color who are changing what it means to be American, and also to left writers committed to social justice who are pointing out critical stories about inequality that really need to be told. I'm really glad that we're honoring him, and to say all of these things in a slightly more eloquent way, I'm proud to introduce Victor LaValle, who's an excellent novelist whose work you should all read. He has a novella out from Tor right now called The Ballad of Black Tom, and you may have read his other books like Big Machine. He's also the winner of numerous awards, including one from Penn and Guggenheim Fellowship. Let's give a hand for Victor.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here today, and even more so to be able to talk for just a couple minutes as Chris is given this great award by this wonderful organization. I want to tell just a kind of a human level story, because on one level, you know, when you're a writer and you're first starting out, or you're trying to get into whatever place you're trying to get into, there can often be the question of like, what will my relationship be like with an editor? If I meet a good editor, what does that mean, and how will we work together? So I just wanted to tell a short story about Chris and I worked together since my first novel. I handed my first novel. It was a strange but generally realistic novel about a young man quite like myself going through exactly what I went through, right, in real life. And then I turned in my second book to him, a novel called Big Machine, and it was completely different. It was a really kind of like wild, surreal story with monsters and all this crazy stuff in it, and it was in really, really sort of rough shape. I gave it into Chris. We met up to have lunch, and he had questions. And he asked me questions like, well, why is this happening? And why is this happening? And who are these people? And what is behind this? And what is behind this? And I took all that stuff home, and I went home with it. And the next day, I wrote him a really angry letter, about 3 or 4 pages long, that told him if he didn't understand that this book was going to be amazing, then he was crazy, and if he didn't know what was good for him, on and on and on, like this, yeah? And to show what a sort of generous and sort of forward-thinking editor Chris was, he asked me to come in, and he said, let's talk about this. It seems like there's a version of this book that you have in your head. Yes? That is amazing, potentially. And then there's the thing you gave me. And my job here is to find a way to create a bridge that takes us from this thing to that thing. And if you will trust me to be honest with you and hard on you at times and praise you at other times, I know we can get to that place. And for that reason, Chris has been just an amazing editor for me from before then, but from then on, I knew I could really have faith in him, and that I couldn't ask for a better artist and editor relationship. And I know from various other friends of mine who also work with Chris, who are writers of his, that this is the way that he approaches the editing game with every writer that he works with. He puts his heart and soul into it, and at the same time, he really makes you work to make it good, if not great. And for that reason, I think he's really deserving of the award today. And that's all I got. So let's welcome Chris Jackson to say...
Thank you very much. Victor did not tell the part of the story where he didn't talk to me for a year after that first conversation, but anyway. Anyway, thank you very much for this award. Thank you again to Victor. I think of Victor as being like the sort of foundational writer in my entire career, and I've been lucky to work with him over a really long time now. Maybe, I don't want to say. And we're working on a new book that will be out next year, which is, I think, his best book ever. Thanks also to the organization, to Ken, and thank you to Chen, who's, I guess, out there somewhere, who recommended me despite the fact that I'm always unconscionably late in getting back to her about proposals. So the award is surprising to get, but also gratifying for a few reasons. One is that I love the Asian American Writers Workshop. Years ago, I participated in some of their writer-editor workshops, which I really enjoyed, but then wasn't invited back after a while. I assumed, because I'd offended Chen by not getting back to her on a proposal, but since then, I've admired their work from afar. The other thing is that I really do believe that literature from groups and points of view considered marginal by our industry and by our country, from immigrants and African Americans to LGBTQ writers, from places on the political spectrum outside of the narrow parameters that define mainstream discourse, is the literature that will redeem this country's culture, as it has from the start. I'm starting a new imprint at Random House that's premised on that idea. Our intention is to publish books of fact and imagination that trace new trails to the past, see the present in all of its diversity and complexity, and help us reimagine the future. Books that tell big stories about the world and about our interiors and our imaginations without having to squeeze those ideas through the narrow channel of the dominant culture, by which I mean white people, or maybe more precisely, people who think of themselves as white, as Baldwin would say. There's always been a huge cost to that gatekeeping. Marlon James, of course, recently wrote about the idea of pandering to the presumed gatekeeper, the middle-brow white woman in his head, who discouraged him from writing novels that wouldn't suit her taste. Marlon James, who just won the Booker, of course, the award for the best writing in the English language in the world in a given year, recently told me that there were books that he'd imagined but never written because of his anxiety about this gatekeeper. And this gatekeeper wasn't just a figment of a paranoid imagination. His first novel was famously rejected dozens of times before finding a home at an indie publisher. Working inside publishing, I've seen that same effect firsthand. I published a couple of years ago a writer named Eddie Huang, who used to be actually on the board of the AAWW, I believe. Eddie's a cultural omnivore, and his voice on the page draws from all kinds of idiomatic sources. There's English and Mandarin, and a combination of the two. There's hip-hop and basketball, and feminist theory, and chef speak, and Eddie Murphy, and Pokemon, and Al Bundy. He's vulgar in the classical sense of the word. He channels the language of the people, and in the more colloquial sense, that is, he tells a lot of jokes about shit. Anyway, he and I worked hard on that first book's language, balancing his modes of vulgarity and trying to find a voice that worked. The book was a success, got largely glowing reviews, we had huge, excited events, it hit the New York Times bestseller list, and eventually spawned, for better and worse, a successful network sitcom. An executive at the company I used to work for read the book a little late, after it had already come out. After she read it, she sent me a very polite note saying that while she enjoyed the book, she found the slang and vulgarity abrasive, and would I please considering it editing out of the book for its next reprint. Mind you, the book was already out, already a success, and it had even already gotten good reviews, but it didn't fit her idea of what the Asian American coming-of-age memoir should be, what it should sound like, what language it should contain. I won't name the person, I don't work with her anymore in any event, but as Eddie and I worked on the book, she was precisely the sort of person we kind of wanted to find the language challenging, not because it was abrasive, but because it was new to her ear. Last week, Eddie and I had an event for his new book at a standing room only crowd at an auditorium in the Random House building. There were young kids and old folks, Asian Americans and Black Americans, Native Americans, and on. And those readers kept us there for an hour of questions and answers, questions about writing and love and food in China, about Cameron, about the Knicks, and really a chance just to glory in the work of a literature written in a language they understood. And for others, a language that expanded their ideas of what language could be. To get free to tell the truth requires language and stories that might not fit through that narrow channel of the dominant culture, of the gatekeeper, and stories that might not fit through there. They're too big, but that is exactly what our culture and world needs. Big, challenging, unfamiliar ideas, but they also need to be excellent, riveting, and beautiful. Work that speaks to the world as it is, not just a cramped world of our gatekeepers. Because that narrow channel is not reality. Reality lies outside of it. Another quick example, I published a book last year called Between the World and Me, which was a bestseller and largely lauded, but there was a lot of debate about whether or not the book was too radically bleak, too harsh in its condemnation of whiteness, unfair in its descriptions of American history. The irony is that that book synthesized the work that scholars have been doing for a generation on the subjects of racism in American history. No academic would be surprised at Ta-Nehisi's descriptions of American racism. He drew from their scholarship, from a broad consensus about the truth of the past. But 1,000 magazine editors assigned pieces about how needlessly bleak the book was, as if Ta-Nehisi was just offering unfounded opinion, not bringing research to bear. Another example to me of how a certain cultural force in this country is uninterested in truth and reality, and would like, in fact, to call truth and reality a niche, or a subculture, or a narrow interpretation. But it's okay, because we're coming for them. Marlon won the Booker, Eddie is a multimedia star 2 books in, and Ta-Nehisi won the National Book Award. We're winning, and we're just getting started. Anyway, again, thank you so much for this award, which I'm humbly accepting as a tribute to the best notion of the multicultural ideal, to a kind of ethical idea of identity that anchors itself in our individual specificity, but opens us to others at the same time. An exclusionary or even assimilative idea of whiteness stands in opposition to that ideal, but it's crumbling. The duration of this white male hegemony over culture has always baffled me, the culture that gave us slavery, genocide, exclusion acts, 2 atomic bombs, and Donald Trump is a strange culture to aspire to. And we're the only ones holding the line, keeping this country from complete self-destruction. It's a big responsibility, holding a country as batshit crazy as this together, which is why we need to do it together. We, all of us across race and background who want to ally, who want to join together and create a wider, truer channel for our culture, are in a fight which we should never forget. But we should also never forget how much we've already won. So thanks again.
That feminist sold quickly, but it was very hard to sell the novel. I think it's very hard if you are not telling the kind of story that people want to see, like Joy Luck Club, or something that can be easily like, oh.
I never had like a structure to every chapter. All I had were the stories I knew that exemplified it, and then I think the spirit of the book is very much that I write the way that I talk. So I'm more of a storyteller than like a technical writer. And I was just like, what is the illest way to tell these stories?